It was a chill autumn afternoon when I first heard the unsettling whispers surrounding the Gardner farm, nestled deep in the hills of Arkham. The townsfolk spoke of it in hushed tones, casting furtive glances in its direction as if fearing the mere mention of its name. I had long been fascinated by the arcane and the unexplained, drawn to the mysteries that lingered in the shadows. Thus, the tales of the Gardners and their cursed legacy stirred within me an irresistible curiosity. Once prosperous, the Gardner family had succumbed to a series of misfortunes that followed the crash of a meteorite on their property. According to local law, this meteorite emitted an otherworldly color, one that defied the very laws of nature and perception. The mere thought of such an anomaly sent a shiver down my spine, igniting my imagination with visions of cosmic horrors and forbidden knowledge. The day I arrived at the Gardner farm, a sense of foreboding settled over me like a heavy mist. The land seemed to be trapped in a perpetual twilight, the sun struggling to break through the oppressive clouds. As I approached the property, I could feel an inexplicable tension in the air, a palpable dread that hinted at the dark history buried within its soil. The fields that had once flourished with crops now lay barren, a twisted landscape where the earth itself seemed to mourn its lost vitality. I could hear the soft rustle of dead leaves beneath my feet as I stepped cautiously through the remnants of a once thriving farm. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant cawing of crows that circled ominously overhead. It was there at the impact site of the meteorite that I felt the true weight of the horror that had unfolded. The ground was scarred, a large crater filled with a strange shimmering substance that reflected a color I had never encountered before. It was as if the very essence of the universe had been encapsulated within that glowing mass, an unnameable hue that eluded definition. I stood at the edge, captivated yet horrified, feeling its eerie pull as it whispered dark secrets to my soul. As I ventured deeper into the heart of the farm, I soon encountered Nahum Gardner, the last remaining member of the family. He was a gaunt man, his face drawn and haggard, a living testament to the weight of his suffering. His once vibrant eyes were now clouded, as if a dark veil had descended upon his spirit. I introduced myself, and though he spoke with a tremor in his voice, I could sense a flicker of recognition in his gaze, a shared understanding of the darkness that surrounded us. Nahum's words were laden with despair as he recounted the events that had transpired since the meteorite's arrival. "It's the color," he muttered, his voice cracking under the strain of his memories. "It seeps into everything. It changes them, corrupts them." His eyes darted around as if he expected the very air to conspire against him. A chill ran through me at his words, a foreboding realization that the darkness had already claimed him. I began to document the grotesque transformations that had plagued the farm, entranced by the horrific beauty of it all. The crops, once robust and verdant, had warped into twisted forms, their vibrant hues tainted by the otherworldly color. They seemed to writhe and pulse, as if infused with a life of their own, responding to some unseen force. It was a scene that defied logic, a nightmare painted in shades of despair. As I explored further, I became aware of the livestock's plight. The animals too were not spared from the color's insidious grasp. I watched in horror as some of them became grotesque caricatures of their former selves, their bodies contorted in unnatural ways. Others simply vanished, leaving behind a haunting silence that echoed through the desolate fields. The very essence of life seemed to decay before my eyes, replaced by an ominous presence that loomed over the land. In my growing obsession with the phenomenon, I felt compelled to stay longer, to understand the depths of this horror. I immersed myself in Nahum's experiences, spending hours listening to his fragmented tales of madness. He spoke of whispers in the night, strange visions that clawed at the edges of his sanity. I felt as though I were being drawn into the depths of his despair, entangled in a web of fear that threatened to ensnare me as well. The days turned into weeks as I became a reluctant companion to Nahum, sharing in his growing terror. His grip on reality began to wane, his thoughts spiraling into chaos. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson, he confided in me a chilling revelation. It's not just the farm. It's everywhere. It's in the water, in the air. It's consuming us all. I felt a growing unease settle in my stomach. Nahum's descent into madness mirrored the landscape around us, the decay of the land reflected in his deteriorating mind. The color, I began to realize, was not merely an external force, it had become a part of us, a malignant presence that thrived on our fear and despair. As I wandered the fields one night, the moon casting eerie shadows across the land, I felt an unsettling awareness of being watched. The silence was oppressive, thick with tension. I heard soft rustling sounds and caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. It was as if the very shadows held their breath, waiting for something to awaken. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake in my makeshift camp, haunted by nightmares of twisted shapes and distorted faces, visions of what the land had become. I could hear the low hum of the color reverberating through my bones, a haunting melody that seemed to call out to me, beckoning me closer to the abyss. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I witnessed the full horror of the color's influence. Nahum, now a shadow of his former self, appeared at my tent, his eyes wild with terror. "It's coming for us," he screamed, his voice a raw edge of desperation. "We must do something." I followed him into the darkness, feeling a mixture of dread and determination. Together we ventured toward the heart of the farm, where the meteorite had crashed. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of foreboding that wrapped around us like a shroud. I felt as though I was stepping into the maw of a great beast, ready to swallow us whole. As we reached the crater, the ground pulsed with an unnatural energy, the color shimmering in the moonlight like a malevolent heartbeat. Nahum fell to his knees, his fingers clawing at the dirt as if trying to unearth some forgotten truth. "We have to stop it," he cried. "It's consuming everything." In that moment, I realized that we were not merely victims of circumstance. We were complicit in the horror that had befallen the Gardner family. The color had intertwined with our very essence, feeding on our fear and despair. I could feel its presence creeping into my thoughts, whispering insidious secrets that threatened to unravel my sanity. Desperate to escape its grasp, I pulled Nahum to his feet, urging him to leave the cursed site. But the color had other plans. As we turned to flee, a deafening roar erupted from the depths of the crater, a sound that shook the ground beneath us. I felt an overwhelming wave of terror wash over me as the color surged upward, manifesting into a swirling vortex of chaos and despair. Nahum and I stumbled backward, our minds racing with horror. The color twisted and coiled, forming grotesque shapes that writhed in the air like tortured souls. I could hear the anguished cries of the land echoing in my ears, a cacophony of suffering that threatened to drown us. In a final act of desperation, I reached for Nahum, pulling him away from the chaos. but the ground beneath us trembled violently, and we were thrown to the earth as the colour unleashed its fury. I could feel the air growing thick with the scent of decay, a noxious miasma that clung to my senses. In that moment of terror, I felt an overwhelming surge of darkness close in around us. The shadows seemed to come alive, curling and twisting, wrapping around our limbs like serpents. I could see Nahum's face contorted in terror, his mind breaking under the strain of the colour's influence. It was as if the very fabric of reality was unravelling before my eyes. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos subsided. The colour receded back into the crater, leaving behind a silence that felt more profound than the horror we had just experienced. I looked around, disoriented and trembling. Nahum lay motionless on the ground, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and resignation. I rushed to his side, desperate to rouse him from his stupor. "Nahum, we must get away from here." But he simply stared into the distance, his mind lost in the shadows. The colour had seeped into his very being, claiming him as its own. In the days that followed, I witnessed the full extent of the colour's devastation. The farm had become a twisted tableau of horror, the once lively land reduced to a grotesque wasteland. The crops, now unrecognisable, pulsated with a life of their own, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. Nahum had become a mere shell of the man he once was, his mind shattered by the weight of the colour's influence. Despite my attempts to escape the horror that surrounded me, I found myself inexorably drawn back to the crater. I could feel the colour calling to me, a siren song that promised knowledge and power beyond comprehension. It was a temptation that gnawed at my sanity, threatening to consume me whole. But as I stood at the edge of the crater, peering into the swirling abyss below, I felt a sudden surge of clarity. The colour was not a force to be understood or wielded. It was a cosmic horror that defied comprehension. It thrived on fear, despair, and the darkness that lurked within us all. I understood then that the only way to escape its grasp was to confront the fear that had taken root within me. With a newfound determination, I stepped back from the edge of the crater. I would not allow the colour to claim me as it had claimed Nahum and the Gardner family. I turned my back on the horror that had unfolded, vowing to carry the weight of their suffering with me as a reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the veil of understanding. As I made my way back to Arkham, I felt the burden of the past heavy upon my shoulders. The stories of the Gardners and their cursed farm would linger in my mind, haunting my dreams and shaping my understanding of the unknown. I had glimpsed the abyss and lived to tell the tale, but the cost of that knowledge was steep. In the end, I realized that some mysteries are best left unsolved, some horrors unexamined. The colour from outer space was not merely a phenomenon, it was a reminder of the darkness that exists within us all, waiting for the opportune moment to emerge. I had survived, but I would never forget the haunting echoes of the colour that lingered in the shadows, whispering dark secrets that would forever shape my understanding of the universe. If you enjoyed our story, please subscribe and leave a comment telling us what your favourite horror book is.